All right, so we actually, if I remember right, we made it all the way last week to Peter's denials. Um, we we finished up on talking about the trial before the Sanhedrin, and in that trial, you remember that they kind of tried to find some witnesses and they couldn't agree, and it was just kind of a kangaroo court. And finally, the high priest told in verse 63, it says, "But Jesus kept silent when they kept asking him, do you not understand? What is it that these men are testifying against you?" In other words, he was supposed to respond to that. The statement they had made, that he had said that I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days. You remember the context of that. In the context of that, he was not talking about the temple in Jerusalem, right? He was talking about his own body. And so we get down to verse 65. Verse 63, and the high priest himself basically made him make a statement. He said, "I adjure you by the living God that you tell us whether you are the Messiah." Remember, when you read Christ, read Messiah, because we're so used to the word Christ, we don't think about what it means. But this is the Messiah. This is the anointed one, is what Christ, the word Christos, means. And are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah, the Son of God? Now you remember how they know that the Messiah is the Son of God? Actually, several places in the Old Testament, but the ones that we've seen over and over and over and over is Daniel 7. In Daniel 7, where you see this, all of these beasts which represent nations, and you see the final beast, and then you see during the time of that final beast, there's a little horn that comes up, and he's talked about several times as you go through chapter 7. But Daniel chapter 7, you have showing that when that final world empire exists, there will be that little horn. And of course throughout the rest of chapter 7 of Daniel, it talks about the fact that this little horn, remember, horn means power, right? I think we talked about one time about goats and cattle and stuff, Why do we dehorn those? Well, those horns are dangerous, And I want to tell you, if you take a bunch of goats and you dehorn them, I'm talking goats because it's been a long time since I worked with cattle, but you take all the horns off of them and leave one on a nanny, she will become the dominant nanny. Why? Because she has horns. She has power. And so that's what horn represents especially when you're looking prophetically throughout the Bible. When you read horn, that is political power. And so this little horn comes up among the 10 other horns and eventually dominates. And it explains as you go through Daniel chapter 7 that this little horn obviously is a person. It's a person that is blasphemous against God. And we tie that to what John says in 1 John, and especially what we see in Revelation, and we realize that this is what we call the Antichrist, even though the Antichrist is not the most common name for this person. He has many names. But what we see there is at the end of that section where it talks about the little horn in the final world kingdom, which will be that kingdom of the Antichrist during the tribulation period, then there is a judgment at the end of that. And you see, in fact, let's just turn back there. You're probably going to say, Rusty, I mean, we've looked at this 2,500 times. I think we've got this down. You know, but maybe I'm exaggerating. But it's so important to see how all this fits together. In in Daniel chapter 7, you get down to chapter 8, and he's basically gone through the world empires. And we know that the first three of those, actually the first four of the world empires, the first three, including the part of the first phase of the fourth one, that's all happened historically. We know it started with the Babylonians, and then the Medo-Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans. And then the Roman Empire fell apart. And the Roman Empire will revive. And this guy will be the head of that Roman Empire. And that will be the Antichrist. And this is the little horn. And so at the end of that, now he gives much more detail in the rest of chapter 7. But at the end of that, this is verse 8, Daniel 7, verse 8. Verse 9 says, at the end of that, there's going to be a judgment. And it describes a being called the Ancient of Days. And this is, I've mentioned to you, this is one of the few times in the Bible where the Father is actually described in like human-like appearance. That is very rare in the Bible. In fact, I don't know of any other place other than maybe Revelation 4 where it's talking about the throne, and then later you see the Lamb, so you see the two persons of the Trinity distinct. This is about the only place that I know of. And it describes him in his holiness and it calls him the Ancient of Days, which took his seat. His vesture was like white snow. His hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne, this is verse 9, his throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels are burning fire. And of course you see the wheels of burning fire and stuff if you read Ezekiel chapter 1 and his vision of God. You see all of that type of thing. This is common language that describes God in his throne room. And so in verse 10 it says, a river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him. So these are thousands upon thousands of beings that are attending the Ancient of Days. Well, this is the Father, and this is the angelic host, which is, the Bible says, innumerable. And myriads upon myriads were standing before him. That's, they're standing before him. That's a position of honor. And the court sat, and the books were opened. This is the judgment of the Antichrist and his kingdom. That's what's going on here. And it goes on later, and we get. I'm sorry. Let's back up. And so we in verse 11 it focuses on the guy that's about to be judged. Then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. Kept looking until the beast was slain and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. Well, that's what we see as we look ahead in Revelation 19. Who's going to deliver this judgment to the Antichrist is Christ himself, the Son of Man here that's mentioned. It says, as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. And we're not going to talk about that right now, but we will someday. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like the Son of Man. This is exactly the description that we saw Jesus give in the Olivet Discourse that we just went through. Talking about you're not gonna miss the coming of the Messiah. When the Son of Man comes, which was him, when the Son of Man comes, it's going to be like lightning. You're not going to be deceived. You're going to know this is him. So kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like the Son of Man was coming, and he came up to the Ancient of Days. So he's coming before the Father, and was presented before him, and to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. And if you think about it, this is really the establishment of his kingdom and his second coming. And although there is a period of that kingdom that is 1,000 years that's defined in Revelation 20, that kingdom never stops. It changes a little bit because the first 1,000 years you still have sinful people living on the earth, and you still have an earth that's not purified of sin. Yeah, we're not to paradise yet. Paradise renewed. Yeah, but that's what's going on here. And so, so when he says, when he's talking about the Messiah, the Son of God, this in Psalm 110 is where that comes from. So they knew that. They knew their scriptures. They knew that. And so they're putting, that's what Jesus is claimed to be. So they're putting him on the spot. You verbally tell us. Of course, how many times does he have to tell them? But they want it in court, a statement. And he said, and he answered them with the passages that he knew in their mind that they were thinking about when they asked him this question. He says, "You have said it yourself." In other words, yes, I am the Messiah, the Son of God. You've said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man. That's the Son of Man here. Daniel 7:13. You will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Psalm 110:1 says he's sitting at the right hand of power. And Daniel 7:13 said when he comes back, he is going to come back on the clouds of heaven. And that's also what we saw in the Olivet Discourse. Now, remember, the rapture is a different thing. He is coming in the clouds in the rapture as well, but it is not a second coming to earth. He's coming to gather his saints, so that the 7 years that he told Israel in Daniel 9 had to occur before Israel was purified and everything was set up as righteous, and basically what will happen in the millennial kingdom. So then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has blasphemed." Only in his mind had he blasphemed, because he was claiming to be the Messiah, the Son of God, and that's who he was. But they didn't believe that, so they called it blasphemy. And of course, the tearing of the robes, as we talked about, expresses indignation or grief sometimes, a strong expression of those emotions. He's blasphemed. What further need do we have of witnesses? Behold, you have now heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They answered, he deserves death. And that was according to the law, Leviticus 24:16 that I have down there. If you blaspheme, it is the death penalty under the Mosaic law. Of course, their exercising of all of the detail of the Mosaic law is limited by the fact that they are under Roman law. And so here it says, then they spat on his face, they beat him with their fists, others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, you Christ, who is the one who hit you?" And as we pointed out, that fulfills Isaiah 53:7. Listen, don't ever think that in your worst day Jesus can't identify with your struggles. I mean, we've spent a lot of time in the Gospels over the last 3 years or so. We went all the way through the book of Mark inductively, which was a wonderful study. Now we've gone almost all the way through the book of Matthew. We know a lot about Jesus' life, and we see that, when you grow up like Jesus did, and you grow up in a family and you're doing miracles and stuff, and your family thinks you're leaving, that you really lost your mind. And from the very beginning, the political leaders were out to kill him. They knew he was a threat to their corruption and their unbelief, their corruption. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and it's so evident in our day. Many politicians will do just about anything to hold on to their position of power. And in the past, in the United States, that was really hard for us to understand because of the Judeo-Christian foundation we had. We've had probably the finest politicians, some of the finest politicians that's ever served a people in the history of the world. I mean, just think about that. And of course, that was produced by the goodness of God because the Western culture was built on the worldview of the Scriptures. And so politicians early on in our society understood that they were public servants. To be elected to an office would be a position of service, of servanthood. Where'd they get that? They got that from Matthew. I mean, Jesus said, listen, I didn't come to be served. I came to serve and give my life a ransom for many. That is a public servant. And so early politicians in the United States understood that, and they sacrificed life and possessions and everything else. But we're probably experiencing in a way that we've never experienced before, in the sense of numerically and depth of depravity and deviousness and evil. Politicians like Jesus had to deal with that will do just about anything to hold on to their power and position and money and really want more. So that's where we are. So Jesus could identify with us. Not only that, but Jesus was treated very poorly in his life by people. He also was treated in a way that he knew that many of the people, not all, but many of the people that he did miracles for, they were thankful for the miracle, but that's all I want from you. You know what I mean? In other words, he was in a sense, from a human perspective, taken advantage of a lot. And then, of course, ultimately, although he had shown all the signs of the Messiah, he was treated like this. And we're starting to just see the first. Many people have told me about the Mel Gibson movie. I've never seen it. I've seen parts of it, but they talk about the blood and all that type of thing, and it probably was very accurate. It probably was like that. We're going to talk about the fact that he was beaten, and he was beaten with. He was beaten with something like he put together and ran the guys out of the temple. Remember, he built a scourge, but they built those scourges and they put little pieces of bone, little pieces of metal on them, and the longer you hit, the more skin they ripped off. So those things are accurate. That's what he experienced. Here, I mean, I know it's hard for us to relate because we're not God men, so we can never totally relate. But in his humanity, he is certainly feeling the humiliation of having somebody spit in your face. Have y'all ever had somebody spit in your face? I mean, besides your brother or sister, somebody like that growing up. I haven't, but that sounds very humiliating to me. And I'm sure that was a sign of humiliation, of humiliating someone in that culture. Spat in his face. They beat him with their fists. He can't do anything. He's bound. So they're just beating the crud out of him, basically. He's getting all bruised up. And others slapped him. How many of you have ever been slapped in the face? few of you. I can think of very few more degrading things for a human than to be slapped in the face by somebody that's looking at you and slapping you. You know. So they're doing everything they can to humiliate him, and then they're, in addition to painful beating and humiliating, slapping and spitting, they're making fun of him as well. Prophesy to us, you Messiah, who is the one who hit you? In other words, if you're who you say you are, then you should be able to say who hit you. Very sad. And so then Matthew switches over to talk about Peter. And of course, we've already talked about Peter. This is verse 69, right at the bottom of page 6 on that Matthew 26 section. We've talked about Jesus telling them. He knew, right? I mean, he really knew. He wasn't just guessing. He knew that they were all going to scatter. We've already read that. And Peter, as we saw, his spirit was willing, wasn't it? In fact, he was a fairly brave guy compared to everybody else. Not only, a lot of people bring out his impulsiveness of jumping out there and saying something that, sticking his foot in his mouth. But you have to give it to Peter, as we've talked about already. Peter actually was pretty brave. And we don't know all that he was thinking, but he's the only one that pulled his sword and cut a guy's ear off. I mean, he was ready to go to battle to protect Christ. So he had some courage. Not only do we see it there, I believe, but I think we see it here. I don't want to just focus here on the fact that he denied Christ, because that's usually the emphasis. And we do want to look at that, but we also want to look at the fact that he had to know that people knew who he was. And yet, when everybody else scattered and hid, Peter was bold enough and brave enough to actually go there to try to figure out what happens to Jesus in a place where he knew he could be recognized. So let's look at that. Let's have somebody read verses 69 through 75.
Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and the servant girl came to him and said, "You too were with Jesus, with the Galilean." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I did not know what you were talking about." When he had gone out to the gateway, another servant girl saw him and said to those who were there, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And again he denied it with an oath. I did not know the man." A little later, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Surely you too are one of them, for even the way you talk gives you away." Then he began to curse and swear, I do not know the man." And immediately a rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the word which Jesus had said, "Before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly.
Okay, we could do a lot of analysis on this. We've got 10 minutes. And I definitely want to finish chapter 26 tonight. Finally. I think this is about our 6th night on chapter 26. But basically we have a historical recording of the fact that although Peter said that he would not deny him, he did. And we talked about last week the fact that as Jesus said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I mean, probably we all could, if we thought for a minute, think of a time where, we had told ourselves, Lord, you give me another chance to witness, and I'm going to do it. I don't know if y'all have ever been there. And so you get on a plane, and you get the opportunity, and you're like, not like this, you always want it your way, and you really don't, you don't share the gospel with somebody or whatever, it could be a lot of different things where, I mean, we want to honor the Lord, and we want to do what He's called us to do, and yet we find in our flesh we are weak and we fail. And Peter and the apostles were no different than us. Their spirit was willing. Their desire, that's little s. Their desire was to stand with Him. But Jesus knew that wasn't going to happen, even though they didn't believe it at the time. And I guess the big thing for me from this whole thing is, we know the rest of the story. We know that God had a plan in this. It's another one of those things where we can't figure out, okay, God gives us free will and we choose to do this, but yet it's almost like He programmed it in because He had a motive of molding us and shaping us and making us who He wants us to be. Does that make sense? It's that sovereignty and free will type thing that we'll never figure out. But Peter would have never been the apostle that he was without this failure. Never. And the encouraging thing is to me that you see in Peter a repentance, that he wept bitterly. Maybe y'all have been there, I've been there, to know that I failed, to know that I hadn't been living for Him. I did things that brought shame on Him, and to just be broken before Him. The sweet thing about that is when there's true repentance, whether we see it in David's life that we've been studying, or Peter's life, or many other people, where there's true repentance, there is restoration, and there is life beyond that, and God still wants to use us after that. I don't know. Any final comments on that? Any stories about if you had something comparable to denying Christ 3 times?
I still have a feeling, and it's all it is, a feeling, obviously, that when Jesus told Peter to put his sword back and put the ear back on the guy, that's what caused everybody to shrink away or just back away.
That's very possible.
He doesn't want us to act.
Right.
So now what do we do?
So they didn't know any other way.
Yeah.
They're thinking that sword we were supposed to bring along,
Yeah.
He's wanting us to use that, and that wasn't.
And that's what. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would have to think.
Yeah.
Well, he told me to put the musket up.
Yes, right.
I'm not supposed to fight.
Right. And that's the only way I know how to fight. I think that's, if what you're saying is accurate, and it very well could be. It was a wonderful way that God showed them that this is not the battle.
It's not your battle.
It's not, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not, this is not a traditional classic battle of force against force on a human level. There's something else going on here. And
The battle is not flesh and blood.
Yes.
So,
Yes. And they learned that. They learned that well because as apostles, they realized that's not the kingdom that we're involved in. That's not the fight we're involved in. We have weapons that exceed those simple earthly weapons. And again, like he told Pilate, my kingdom's not of this world. You know, that's not what's going on now. So,
And don't you think even if this scenario happened today and someone said that, I mean, they would just be thought of as, no,
Right.
you know, just would
yes,
do away with him, put him away, he's crazy, put him in a padded cell.
yes, absolutely. All right. Well, we finished 26. Yay! 27 and 28 is not quite. They're not quite as long as 26. They're long, but they're not that
Just
long.
depends on how long we work on it.
Well, that's true. That's true.
We have to deal with Judas,
Yes,
that's
we do have to deal with Judas. We will talk a lot about him.
I
Yes.
think I said something about the third time that they asked Peter,